30 seconds of it's 30 seconds before, so like everything we say is 30 minutes before. I guess that's what's going on. Because everything I see, it's like replaying, it's not like going exactly the way.
Okay.
Okay. So do you have any questions for me? Oh, I guess we need to introduce you. So, hi everyone, hi creatives. This is Kyla Mitsunaga. She wrote a book as an author, and the title is On Growing. Would you like to introduce yourself better?
Hi, everybody. Welcome to Lenda Chen's first live. Yay! Super exciting. Yeah, let's see. My name is Kyla. I'm zooming in from Korea. I am a global happiness coach, speaker, trainer, author, and an energy healer. Nice to meet everybody and excited to be here. And thank you so much for having me, Linda.
Yeah, and I'm really excited to have you too. So I think one of the questions I really wanted to ask you that I felt like a lot of people should hear is basically like grief. So basically, like something that I heard you say, like in one of our meetings, is basically people are grieving for their past lives. Yeah. So can
Mm-hmm.
you explain that?
Sure. Yeah, and I think, you and I, when we were talking about, what is the thing that I would want to talk about on your show, and something that's been on my mind and the minds of my clients. And I think just globally, collectively, we are all grieving our old lives. So, of course, if somebody a friend or a family has passed because of COVID, absolutely makes sense that, we are in grieving during that kind of situation. But the other thing is, back to your question, we are all grieving our old lives, right? Like
Yeah.
when we were able to go out, without a mask, or able to travel around freely and, go to concerts and,
Yeah.
so that's what I mean.
Yeah. So, how do you feel like if someone like I see a lot of students and teachers basically have trouble with like just so there was this TikTok and basically the talk was like, hey, the students are grieving. They're not seeing any of their classmates. They have a ton of workload that some people don't even have internet for. And like so it's basically saying like the students of like all the schools and stuff are just like grieving a lot and like what do you think would be the best way to help them?
Yeah, that's a great question and a loaded question.
I guess you can answer what is something what is one exercise you would do with them?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I think before we tackle your question,
Mhm.
I think it's good to zoom out a little bit, and look at what we know about grief based on David Kessler's work.
Mhm.
So I don't know if you've heard of David Kessler. Like he's a grief expert, and he worked with Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. So she's the one that created the 5 stages of grief.
Mhm.
And just so, would it be okay if we just kind of review what the 5 stages are?
Yeah, sure.
Linda? Okay. So I wrote them down because I always
Okay.
forget. The 5 stages are: number one, denial; number two, anger; number three, bargaining; number four, depression; number five, acceptance; and number six, finding meaning. So those are the 5 stages, and the sixth one, finding meaning, we'll get to, and this will kind of lead into answering your question. So David Kessler's story is he became a grief expert. He worked under Elizabeth Kubler-Ross for years, and then in his own personal life, his son passed away of a drug overdose. So it was quite unexpected. And he didn't know what to do. And he felt really at a loss. Like, that's a play on words, right, too. And I really resonated with his story because in my own personal life, some of you may already know that I was calling myself a global happiness coach, and I knew all this research on science of happiness, positive psychology, neuroscience, you name it, I knew it. But after my mom was diagnosed with early onset dementia, I couldn't help myself become happy. So, what I found really incredible about David Kessler's work is that through his own personal journey with grief, he discovered and wanted to add this sixth stage of grief, which is finding meaning. And, to answer your question about, well, what's one thing that we can do, or, what's one piece of advice to give to the students, it's really also a question, right? It's less of advice. Like nobody wants advice.
Yeah, yeah, you're
Like,
right.
I mean, yeah. So that's another podcast about nobody wants advice, but
Yeah,
especially when you're grieving, right? When you're in the grieving journey, just understanding that, like any journey, your journey is unique to you. And what is it that you could do to find meaning, right? And does that look like, okay, I'm going to volunteer somewhere? Does that look like, I'm going to, you know, uh, write a letter of gratitude to myself every day? Does that, I mean, it's really different for each one of us, because as humans, 7 billion of us on this planet, we're so different.
yeah.
So, yeah, does that kind of answer your question?
A little bit. So actually, I watched another TikTok today. I think a lot of my talk today will be inspired by a lot of TikToks. But basically, it was like this guy was like, he said, one of the activities I like doing to myself is basically asking why though. So basically,
Mm-hmm.
what the whole thing is like, how are you feeling? Sad. Why though? And then it just like keeps going from there. And I
Right.
think that's like a really cool question to ask yourself because it's just like it helps you get to the bottom of that question.
Yeah, it's so interesting and timely that you're bringing up that why, because I'm just putting together this workbook for my 8-week happiness course, and that's one of the modules, like start with why. Um, and I don't know if are you familiar with Simon Sinek's work,
I am not familiar with
Linda?
any kind of work.
Okay. Well, you're familiar with TikTok work.
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
I, I don't even have a TikTok account, so it's that's really great that you're able to get on TikTok and learn.
Yeah.
So Simon Sinek is he's an author, and he's he gives talks on organizational behavior and organizational psychology. And he has this book called Start with Why. And if you think about why is this like target with why is in the middle, and what and how come later, right? And that's because people often talk about what their product is, right, or how to use it, but few of us talk about why. Like, why does it matter?
Mm-hmm.
And I just think that it's so simple. I'm all about simple exercises and simple
Yeah.
questions. And even in my book, that's one of the exercises, that the growth work exercises that I have people do, right? Why is growth work important to you?
Yeah.
And then why is that important? Why is that important? Why is that important? Till
Yeah.
you get to your top why.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, absolutely. That's a great exercise.
So in your book, on growing, what is one of your favorite exercises that you feel like, I guess, really compelled to talk about right now?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think I will share the last growth work activity because we talked about it in my virtual on growing book club recently. And it's a very meaningful one for me.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm just going to frame it. So let's zoom out a little bit.
Okay.
So something that I learned along the way, and it was quite challenging thing to learn,
Mm-hmm.
growing pains, um, is that if you imagine forgiveness and judgment on a seesaw,
Mm-hmm.
and if you can imagine, so when judgment of self and others is high, right, then forgiveness of self and others is low. Conversely, if judgment of self and others is low, then forgiveness of self and others is high.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So basically, the less you judge yourself and others, the more forgiving you can be, right? And I bring this up because I was, and I think still am to a certain degree, very judgmental of myself.
Mm-hmm.
Like, why'd you do that, Kyla? Like, you could have done better. Why didn't you, I don't know, do XYZ sooner?
Mm-hmm.
That kind of inner critic voice. But that comes from judgment, right?
Yeah.
So along those lines, something that I found to be very powerful, and I work on with clients as well, is self-forgiveness.
Yeah.
And what that looks like is in this last activity in my book. And it's also, there's a reason that it's last, right? Because you got to
Mm-hmm.
go through this journey and like work through a lot of other stuff. um, but it's a letter, like writing a letter of forgiveness to yourself.
I like that. That's really good because I think when I was actually in foster care and I like actually went into foster care, I had a lot of guilt and like you said, like writing a letter of like just forgiving yourself is just, I think it's really important for a lot of people that have like trauma related stuff. It's just like forgiving yourself because you feel like you caused the pain, but in reality like you didn't. So yeah.
Right. Yeah, no, absolutely. And the other piece to that is, we kind of, with trauma, we kind of hold on to the past, right? And
Mhm.
or we relive that incident or situation
Yeah.
over and over again, right? And if you imagine the past is kind of like this ball and chain, right? And imagine if you're trying to run, or you're trying to skip, or
Mhm.
you're trying to jump, or you're trying to do anything in life, that ball and chain is going to hold you back, right? And you may want to go faster, right? Or
Yeah.
you know, and at a certain point, that ball and chain is going to start hurting, right? It's going to
Yeah.
cause the marks, right, around your ankle
Yeah.
from where it's dragging. But forgiveness is this tool that cuts that chain. So you can run, play, jump, skip freely and do whatever it is that you want to do and continue to move forward. But until we forgive ourselves, that ball and chain is it's still there.
Can you explain more about why forgiveness cuts the chain? Because my next question to you actually was going to be like, yeah, like, does therapy help cut, like, make the chain smaller? Or, like, but yeah.
Yeah, I think, forgiveness is really powerful because we often, let's zoom out again a little bit, but the forgiveness is often misunderstood. So what I mean by that is, when we think of forgiveness, we often think that, um, if I forgive, let's say it's about a person, and even if it's about yourself, right?
Mhm.
Well, that means that, that person is off the hook, and they need to pay for their sins, and like really dramatic situation. I'll just
Mhm.
speak for myself. um, and I think, I can't speak for therapy, right? Because I think that therapy is different depending on who the person is
Yeah.
who's receiving the therapy, and who the therapist is,
Mhm.
and what kind of trauma you are experiencing, right? But I can speak to, the forgiveness piece, in that it isn't about the other people, it's about you, right?
Yeah.
So if you imagine that, maybe you're upset with someone and you're like, well, if I hold the grudge, resentment. So in energy healing, there's like 3 R's. We're kind of slight tangent, but it'll make sense.
Okay.
Reg- Regret, rejection, and resentment. Okay.
Okay.
Those are the 3 R's. And those also hold us back. And a big one for forgiveness and related to forgiveness is resentment. If I hold on to this resentment, somehow that person will pay for what they did to me,
Mhm.
right?
Okay.
But if you listen to that sentence, okay, um, it is a limiting belief,
Yeah.
right? So going back to your question, how do we move forward with forgiveness, or how does forgiveness work? It's really about understanding yourself more, right? So bringing the awareness, and then acceptance, and then having some kind of action plan, right? I call it the AAA method. It's also in my
Mhm.
book, right? And then going backwards, right? You can't act on something you don't accept, and you can't accept something that you're not aware of.
Mhm.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And so if you understand yourself more, and I think you and I talked about this on another mental health talk, the Universal Asian Mental Health Talk.
Mhm.
If imagine we all just spent the amount of years that we spent studying other subjects, if we
Mhm.
spent those years studying ourselves, and I
Yeah.
remember you
Yeah. Yeah.
commented,
Yeah.
right, that the world would be a better place. But that's really what that is, because
Mm-hmm.
it's not just about forgiveness, it's about kindness, compassion, inner strength, inner peace, all those factors that when we judge ourselves, we are further and further away from those. But the reason that we're further and further away from that is we spend so much time in either avoidance mode or survival mode and not in growth mode. So I kind of went on a little bit of a tangent to your question.
Yeah, I I really like the idea of like the school system actually being like a playground of just like us figuring out who we are than actually like just learning meaningless stuff like math that we would never use. I think school did teach a lot of like common things like oh, turn in your assignment on time or like oh, if you're late to class, you're going to get in trouble, but like it really doesn't teach you about yourself, and I feel like it doesn't teach about yourself, and even like it just kind of mitigates or like makes smaller like the idea of yourself even. So yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great summary of that. And also, it doesn't, if you think about the core challenges that we experience with mental health, right? And
Mhm.
so many of our diseases, like 72% of our diseases are related to stress,
Mhm.
right? School does not teach us how to deal with fear, anxiety, stress, depression, any of it.
Yeah.
Like it teaches us how to like self-medicate, like get the drugs, like, or
Yeah.
go drink alcohol,
Yeah.
right? Just look at the movies, right?
Yeah.
Movies, Netflix,
Absolutely. Yeah.
right? And those are ways of avoidance, right? Addiction,
Mhm.
avoidance, push it down, push it down, push it down. And what we're seeing in COVID, and I think you and I have talked about this as well, right? Is that the real crisis of COVID is not COVID itself, but the mental health crisis.
Mhm.
Because now we can't go to the bar, or we can't go to, all the vices that we used to have. Now we are quite confronted with what it is that we need to heal.
Mhm.
Yeah. So, what do you think about all this?
Just basically exactly what I just said. Basically like yeah, it's an issue and yeah.
Cool. Yeah. I mean, it's a work, it's a work in progress. And, I think that the positive thing that's also coming out of COVID is that, there's a more and more of a destigmatization of mental
Mhm.
health.
Yeah.
More
Yeah.
companies and more organizations are coming out and supporting, uh, employees, in mental health, and looking at ways in which we can really connect more and support each other more and heal more.
Mhm.
So that's the silver lining, I think.
Speaking of just like I guess the workforce, I guess. Um, there's a lot of people losing jobs right now. Um, what do you think about like all those people losing jobs and what would be one thing that you would do to help them, I guess, or say?
Yeah. I think that there's a lot of people suffering,
Mhm.
whether it's grief, somebody, you've lost someone you love, you've lost a
Mhm.
friend, you've lost a family member, whether it's you've lost a job, right?
Mhm.
There's a lot of loss.
Yeah.
Um, and when I think about my own personal growth story, and my own journey with loss,
Mhm.
I think that really every moment in our lives,
Mhm.
whether you're dealing with loss or you're dealing with another challenge, there's an opportunity to either avoid it, survive it, or grow.
I love that. Yeah.
right? And
Yeah.
it's, if you imagine, this is what I share with clients a lot. If you imagine on the y axis, that's a level of growth. And you
Mhm.
imagine on the x axis, that's time,
Mhm.
right? And you imagine each point is an opportunity to grow.
Mhm.
So if you avoid something, that level of growth goes down. If you survive something, it just stays flat,
Yeah.
right? If you're growing from something, right, you're going upwards, right? So
Yeah.
for you, right, you left your 9 to 5 job, you're branching out on your own, right? That one could see that as, oh, that's a loss, right? But one could also see that as, that's an opportunity for her to grow
Yeah.
into something that she was, that, like you talk about on your website, right? Like,
Yeah.
that's something that I've wanted to do. This
Mhm.
is my calling,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, it is.
Um, and if you had never had that loss, let's just quote unquote call it loss, right? Because
Yeah.
you may
Yeah.
call it that, opportunity, right?
Yeah.
We wouldn't be on this call right now,
I
right?
didn't think of it like that, but
You
yeah.
would
I
still
like
be in
that.
your old job,
And I would be
right?
too drained to actually be on any of these calls and make any of these videos. So yeah, you're right.
And I would add to that, right? Just like circling back to grief,
Mhm.
right? At some point, maybe you were, I don't know, like, were you dealing with the grief of your old life, your old job, your old lifestyle?
That's the question, isn't
Yeah,
it?
that's the question.
Um, was I dealing with like my past lifestyle? I feel like I was more liberated rather than feeling sad about that. I was just really scared in the sense like no income was coming in, basically.
Mm,
And I really
right,
had to like self validate myself and make sure like, hey, you're okay. Like, it's, you have plenty of money to like make sure you'll be okay for a few months and just like, yeah. So, um, I feel like I really just I forgot your question.
oh no, that's okay. No, that's okay. Yeah, no, I think you already answered it. Basically, I just was asking, um, you know, were you grieving your old life?
Yeah.
But you said you felt more liberated, right?
Yeah.
Than
Yeah.
grief,
hmm I think
which is great.
I think one of the things I actually grieved about was just the income coming in. So I
Sure,
was, yeah.
sure. Yeah, that makes sense. And so, when looking at, your case, right? And, going back to we're like, it's seemingly tangent, but we're like going back to your original question, right? Of
Yeah.
what would you say to people who've lost their jobs, right?
Yeah.
But what a inspiring example you are,
Yeah.
right? Like, you left your job. I mean, okay, that people are getting fired. That is
hmm
not, that is, one of the 3 R's, rejection,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? That can hurt. And
hmm
absolutely, there's grief, right? Whether the grief is around the income, right? The income stability,
hmm
or it's around, oh, I miss my coworkers, right? Like the
Yeah.
interaction with
Yeah.
the coworkers, right? Who become like our family, or whether it's just around that, identity, right? We attach so much
Yeah.
stuff,
Absolutely. Yeah.
right? Our identity to our job and our titles, right?
hmm I think
What
that
were,
was actually, I
mm,
think that was some of it that I was like really freaked out about. Like, just like,
mm,
oh, what is my title now? Like, what am I if I'm not a software programmer, like software engineer? Like, what
right,
am I worth? And that really set me on the tangent of looking for actually what I could help impact the society with. So, yeah.
right, right, exactly. And so, Linda, those are all based on like limiting beliefs too, right? Like in
hmm
society, we're like, oh, we can only be worthy or have value if we are a doctor or a lawyer or some
Yeah.
kind of, right?
Something that other people find really awesome when you're like really sad about even. So, yeah.
Right. And so I would also add, like, how we talked about too, I don't know if you remember the concept of self transcendence,
Mm,
but
I think you had to jog my memory.
yeah, no worries. So looking at your case, right, Linda,
Hmm.
you're here, you had the courage to leave your job. You are doing your first live YouTube. Yay.
So
Let's
scary,
just
but yeah.
celebrate Linda. And you're fully vulnerable, right? Like, it's scary. I'm worried about my income. Like, you're fully transparent about it, right?
Yeah.
That's the awareness and the acceptance, and you're pushing through, right? That's the action piece.
Hmm.
Um, but so that's on the micro level, right? That's like with you, right?
Okay.
You, the
Yeah.
person, Linda, that's what you're going through. On a macro level, let's say there is a Gen Z person, or it doesn't have to be Gen Z. It could be, any generation. And they
Hmm.
watch one of your YouTube videos and they're like, oh my God, I can see what's possible for me because of Lenda's journey.
Oh my God.
I can leave my job and start my own YouTube channel because Linda did it. And I can resonate with her or her story.
Yeah.
That's the self transcendence piece, right? Transcending your own fear, your own anxiety, your own stress, your own limiting beliefs around income or whatever it is,
Yeah.
right? To inspire others to be the best versions of themselves. And that's exactly what you're doing. So
I
bravo to you, girl. Get it.
I have to look up the term of self transcendence now because that was very enlightening and wow. Okay, so I will have to look that up and actually basically like define it so I know what it actually means. But yeah, that's really cool. The idea that basically me and my awareness and me telling my story is going to affect someone else and like get them to start something. Like I I just thought my story was just a story. Like I didn't think like yeah, I didn't think I was going to have that much impact on anyone actually. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I often talk about this with my friend MK. She might be on the call too. Hi, MK, if you're on the call. Um, in the beginning of my own growth journey with my business, I would always lament to her, right? Like, I didn't get the whole room, like the whole work, because I used to do in-person workshops, and now
Mhm.
we can call it Zoom room, right? I would always, and this is the judgment piece, right?
Mhm.
I'd always like kind of judge myself, like, oh, there was that one person in the room who didn't
Yeah.
get it, or there's that one person who didn't do the dance, or whatever crazy activity I was having people do.
Yeah.
And she would be like, Kyla, it's not about getting the masses. It's just about, what if you just change one person's life? That's it. And then I thought about that because my spiritual coach in Bali, I also talk about my book, when I was first launching my first book into the world, I was like this, right? Any new thing, right? Any new project that you're like creatively putting out into the world, there's a lot of fear
Mhm.
and anxiety um, because it's also, again, to do with judgment, right? How will people judge me?
Yeah.
What will people say if I don't say the right thing on the YouTube live? And what if
Yeah.
I make a mistake? People are going to judge
Yeah.
me, right? People are going to make fun of me. It's like the showing up
Mhm.
naked to the classroom nightmare.
Yeah.
Um, but, my spiritual coach in Bali said to me, hey, Kyla, for everything that you create and you put into the universe, there is at least one person who really needed to read that or see that or hear that. And that's it.
Yeah.
That's also to do with the self-transcendence, right? You are
Yeah.
transcending your own fear and your own anxiety and your own stress and your own fear of the judgment, really,
Mhm.
um, because it's actually not about you, right? It's about the macro level of, like, going back to the schooling and what you were saying about, if we all just raised our vibration and understood ourselves a little bit better, right? We would together collectively be and show up so differently for and with each other.
Yeah.
So, yeah. What else, girl? How are you feeling? How are you feeling about your first
Well,
YouTube live?
you almost made me cry about the transcendent stuff. I was just like thinking
Yeah, girl,
about
you're
just
doing
like,
it.
yeah, I was just thinking about how like, oh my God, I like there could be this little girl or this little boy out there that's like, I want to make a live or I want to make a YouTube channel because Linda did it, and yeah, that's like that just makes me so happy. So yeah.
Oh, yeah, just speaking my truth, girl. And, especially I know you and I have talked about this too, like, especially the visibility piece for hyphenated Asians,
Hmm.
right? There's not a lot of us in the
Yeah,
personal growth
absolutely.
space.
Yeah. I
So,
actually,
go ahead.
oh, so actually I was gonna talk about that in one of my next videos, basically like my story, and it was gonna be about how like I was a foster kid, and being a foster kid that's Asian or Chinese in a community that's like in a North American community that's like almost unheard of. So like I really haven't met many like Asian people in the foster care system. So just like I feel like a lot of people can relate to my story because just because they're not in North America doesn't mean like I can't touch someone else's life in like all the way in China and how like they were orphaned or like, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And, whether they're relating to you as a hyphenated Asian in the foster care system, or, they're relating to you as somebody who's going through her personal growth journey and sharing it and, creating her first YouTube live, whatever they're relating to you on, whatever level that is, you've changed their life.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah.
And if today is our last day on earth, right? I get this question a lot, right?
Yeah,
Like,
I
Kyla,
hear that a
you
lot.
know, oh, go ahead.
Oh, yeah, I like talk about that a lot too, but yeah, go.
Yeah, I get this question a lot, right? Like, well, what's your tip of, like, happiness or personal growth, or, and again, I don't really give advice, but I do share the story of this one Uber driver. I'm not sure if I shared this story with you, but I'll share it again for our audience too. But I was taking this Uber in New Jersey, and the journey was roughly 30 minutes.
Hmm.
And this driver was telling me all about how she really wanted to start this YouTube makeup tutorial channel.
Yeah.
And in the beginning, I would, interject a little bit, like, oh, that's so great. I'm always like everyone's cheerleader, right? Like,
Yeah.
you can do it.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Like, wow. And every time I said something, she would cut it down, right? With a limiting belief. Oh, I can't. I'm not good enough.
Yeah.
And I'm not judging her. I just saw my old self in her.
Hmm.
So I realized, it would be better if I just held the space for her and I just listened. So I listened to her for the next 25 minutes
Hmm.
of all the reasons why she did not start the YouTube channel, right?
Uh-huh.
And then my destination is coming up.
Hmm.
and I'm, about to get out of the car. And she
Mm.
turns around to me and she goes, "Oh, you're a coach. Like, what do you think about, like basically what's your advice, right?" And I'm like halfway out the door. Like I've got like one foot out the door. She's getting the next ding, 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 ding for her next Uber jobs.
Oh,
Oh my gosh, what can I say in the last 1 minute here?
yeah, with her to impact her life. Yeah.
Yeah, and I know, like you said, you've probably talked about it before, and so I just shared with her that something that I do every morning, even before COVID, is I look in the mirror and I just ask myself, if today were my last day here on Earth, would I be wanting to do what I'm doing? So, like, if this was my last hour on Earth and I'm doing this YouTube live with Linda, great. And Kim Jong Un wants to press that button in 15 minutes. And this is my last activity that I'm doing with you.
I
I'm
just
good with
realized
it.
why you mentioned him, and I was like, oh,
Oh.
okay.
Yeah, because I'm in Korea.
Yeah.
The threat is real.
Oh my God, that's scary.
But no, I mean, that aside, yeah. But politics aside, if you cannot answer that question, right? Like if today is your last day, would you be wanting to do what you're doing? Then it's simple, right? Just change something,
Yeah.
right? So I think that that's also a story that I love to share because, yeah, it's not easy to think about that, but I think a lot more people are thinking about
Yeah.
that more and more given COVID
Mm.
and how it's been spreading, especially in the U.S.
Yeah,
So.
so like one question that I would ask about that would be like, I ask this to a lot of people that I feel like are like my role models. So basically, it's like, how do you find the balance between life is really long, you gotta save money, and tomorrow's the last day? Like, how do you find that balance, and where do you stand there?
Yeah, that's such a good question. And I actually was on this call with one of my former clients yesterday, and we actually talked about limiting beliefs
Mm.
around money because that's such a big challenge for a lot of female.
Yeah,
I work with a lot with female founders,
yeah.
and myself included,
Mm.
right? So the balance of like the YOLO versus the reality of maybe I might live longer.
We should think of a name for that. Like, there's YOLO. What else is there? What's the
The,
other one? You know?
the opposite of YOLO.
Yeah, life is long.
Adulting, is that um yeah, that can, maybe that can be your next YouTube episode. um yeah, so I love that you brought up the word balance because I think that that's so key, right? And whenever when things are out of balance, that's when we get the stress and the anxiety and
Mhm.
the pressure, right?
Yeah.
So I think the question to ask is, what are the limiting beliefs that I have around money or, whatever it is that are causing me stress, and work through those, right? And then the second thing to ask is, what do I need in my life to create more balance, right? And it could be, oh, I need to buy myself, fresh flowers every once in a while. Or it could be, I
I
need
see. I see
to
what you mean.
clean, it could be as simple as, I need to Marie Kondo my a corner of my apartment
Yeah.
so I can have the headspace
Yeah.
to, right?
So
Um,
it's basically like basically choosing between sometimes I'm gonna go like YOLO it and spend like a ton of money on some food, and sometimes it's like we need to save some money. So is that
yeah,
what I
I mean, yeah, I mean, yeah, I think that, but also, right, bringing it back to getting to know yourself,
Mhm.
right? So if, for example, you do like, do more YOLO, right? I mean, let's say, so far you've done 80% YOLO and 20% adulting or whatever we're
Yeah.
calling it, right? And you're like, huh, I still feel in my body, I still feel anxiety, right? So, what is it that I need to do to bring that percentage, maybe 70% YOLO, 30% adulting? You know what I'm
Mm.
saying?
Yeah.
And that's a growth journey for you, right? Like
Yeah.
what that percentage may
Mhm.
be different for me. That may be different for you. Maybe in your 20s and 30s and 40s and 50s, that's
Yeah.
going to look very different.
Yeah.
Um, but that's also part of your growth journey, right?
Mhm.
Is taking a one of those Coursera courses on investing in the stock market, right? Is that going to help me get through some of my growth goals and limiting beliefs around money,
Mhm.
right? So, does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay.
And I'm noticing we are at 8:50, so that's almost like 50 minutes of us just talking. Um,
Yay!
I am so honored and thankful, and if nobody enjoyed this like talk, I enjoyed it so much, and I'm gonna remember it so much down the road. About like that person that gave me that chance and had enough patience to let me do this. Yeah.
Oh, thanks, Linda. And um, do we have any questions
Oh
or
yeah, okay. Yeah, if
we
anyone
take some
has any
questions?
questions, we will take questions right now for the next, I guess, 2 minutes.
And while people are typing in their questions, um, yeah, I just wanted to say, Linda, I hope that you do something to celebrate yourself today. Like this is such
hmm
a great milestone for
You know,
you and
we
in
totally
your
did.
personal
We
growth journey.
celebrated before we went into this live today.
Even better. Pre celebratory.
Yeah.
Pre celebration.
Yeah, we'll probably go get boba this weekend. Just like my favorite boba place
Oh,
and stuff.
awesome. What's your favorite boba drink
Um,
combo?
okay, so there's this place. I think it's like they sell pho. So
Hmm.
basically like their drinks are not like milk tea drinks. They're just
Hmm.
like frozen fruit drinks or like stuff like that. And one of their drinks that they make is like a green tea like latte matcha, but it's like an icy drink. It's like a frappe,
Mm,
and
mm.
it's basically like matcha with lots of ice, like blended up, and just like a really rich flavor, and it's so creamy. And then there's the boba, and their boba isn't sweetened with any honey or anything, so it's just like perfect. So yeah, it's
Ooh,
yeah. It just
sounds
takes too long
amazing.
just to get across town just to get it. So sometimes we're just like, oh no, like we don't want to go all the way across town. And yeah,
But then you get the
I
boba and you're like, it was worth it.
yeah, it's always worth it. Like we always forget how good it is. So yeah.
That's awesome. I love matcha. I bought like a milk frother recently because
Uh
it's
huh.
hard to. This is like the remaining, but
Uh huh.
I make a matcha latte for myself in the mornings.
You're
That's like
gonna
my morning ritual.
you're gonna have to give me a recipe because so
Yes.
recently I made a hot chocolate recipe, and I'm
Hmm.
trying to think of like matcha powder recipe, like matcha powder latte recipe, and that would be so
Mm.
exciting to make. So yeah.
Yes, hit me up, sister.
Okay, well, I'm gonna end the live now. Have a
Okay.
good
Do we
day.
have any questions,
I
Linda?
don't think so.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.